Saint Padre Pio has to be counted among one of the greatest saints in the Church. What can we learn today about Padre Pio's life? How did he approach his relationship with God? What can we learn from his simple approach to faith and the words of wisdom he often gave to the people he helped? How can this benefit our own spiritual life and draw us closer to God? Throughout his life, whenever people sought Padre Pio's advice or counsel on something, he would direct their focus to God and away from anything that was a distraction or danger to their spiritual life and ultimately their salvation. His lessons are very much relevant in our world today, which is filled with so many distractions. If we are to grow in our relationship with God, Padre Pio is a great example to emulate. Hi, and welcome to a video. Our story begins in San Giovanni Rotondo, where Filippo DiCaprio's wife's pregnancy is not going well. The specialists and doctors in Napoli and Foggia had said either the child or the mother would die during delivery. Filippo, worried, sought Padre Pio to seek his help and receive his prayers. Padre Pio assured him that both his wife and unborn child would survive. The days passed, and Filippo started doubting. He asked Padre Constantino to remind Padre Pio about his wife and child. Padre Pio replied, if anything is to happen, it would be a result of his lack of faith. And everything happened exactly as Padre Pio had mentioned earlier. Padre Pio in this situation displays a deep level of trust and surrender to God, a surrender to his will and an unshakable faith in his goodness. This comes, I guess, from a conviction that God is good. Even though things are not moving well at that particular time and everything is a mess and all seems lost. Nevertheless, when all the chips are down, Padre Pio still displays a grounded faith and encourages Filippo to do the same. Most of the time, when things are going well, people are convinced that they can do anything for the Lord, that they can go through all the trials and tribulations for love of Him. But when things start to get difficult, a lot of us start complaining, like the Israelites in the desert. Now, don't get me wrong. Life can bring very serious challenges, some of them which are very difficult to bear. But at times, I think we need preparation. For example, asking for the grace from God to be able to persevere in times of difficulty, the gift to be able and the grace to be able to persevere all the way to the end. This is of great importance. And this is a lesson to us in our everyday lives. It doesn't have to be a catastrophe. It could be everyday things, like, for example, you're going to write your exam and you just need God to be with you at that particular time so that you can pull through. And an exercise of faith, an unshakable faith, practiced on such small and seemingly trivial matters in life, will transfer into the difficult times in future when we will need to have a really grounded and solid faith and trust in God. There will always be situations in our lives which are very difficult, situations which are brick walls, which we cannot just break through with our own bare hands. At these points, in these times in our lives, these are the periods when we will need God to break down those walls and to be our strength, to surrender ourselves to Him and accept that we do not have control over every aspect of our lives. This is true when it comes to the spiritual life and life in general. There are some situations which we just do not have any control whatsoever, and we need to surrender to God. If it is that we had control over every situation in our life, then we would not need God. We would be gods ourselves. Saints are similar to, particularly if we were to go back to when we were younger, when we were in school. They are similar to those children who sit right next to the teacher and get straight A's all year. This trait helps them to develop trust in God, and trust is a very important component in the spiritual life. Now, Padre Pio, aside from the fact that he is a gifted individual, has walked with God for a very long time. And by the time he comes to intercede for Filippo's wife and unborn child, he has already been walking with God for many decades. He has had that time to develop that relationship with God through trials and tribulations. And Padre Pio, earlier on in his life, was no stranger to struggle and challenges. There has been already many highs and lows in his relationship with God, and this has brought him closer to the Lord. Since childhood, Padre Pio was plagued by ill-defined physical problems. He suffered from intestinal irritability, inability to retain any solid food for weeks and months on end, spasms of violent coughing, excruciating headaches, and unusually high temperatures. Some days, he would be reduced to the point of death, only to recover suddenly. In 1908, in Montefusco, a doctor made the devastating diagnosis of pulmonary tuberculosis, and he had to be sent home to avoid contagion. At home, Andrea Cordon refused to give that diagnosis and suggested that Padre Pio see a specialist. In Naples, the doctors were not able to say what the matter was. He went back to Montefusco, but was soon seized by violent stomach cramps, persistent coughing, and had to be sent back home again. Each time he was sent back home, he improved. He could not spend a day at any friary without suffering a relapse. Imagine the patience that Padre Pio developed over so many years, going through all these trials and tribulations. Now, I am sure there were times when Padre Pio was going through all these difficulties, when it felt like he was alone and abandoned. It must have been difficult. Of course it was. But he probably knew that this was the way in which he was going to get closer to God. And looking at Padre Pio's early life, the difficulties he went through, is a lesson to us today to show us that life is not always supposed to be a joyride where we have our own fill of fun and relaxation on this earth, then march off into the sunset, straight into heaven, where we're supposed to have our rest. We might not be called to go through the levels of difficulties Padre Pio went through during his life, but that does not mean that we must not drink of the cup of suffering which Christ drank of. We must not shirk the cross. We must embrace it. Embracing the cross makes the burden easier to bear. It's like someone, for example, who sets out to lose weight, and they pick up running to do that. It's going to suck every time they take those shoes, put them on, and run and put in those miles. But guess what? Every time they finish with their run, they're going to feel good because they know that they've been disciplined and they've done the work that is necessary for them to get to their goal, which is to lose weight. In the long run, they see a change in their body, a body which they've always wanted and one which they've put in so much work to actually achieve. I have a question for you. Please leave it at the bottom of the video in the comments below. I've seen a lot of people in the faith struggle with, on the one hand, being disciplined, following the faith and having a good prayer life, and on the other hand, maybe being too harsh on themselves, too unforgiving of their own mistakes and those of others. How do you think one can overcome this? I'm interested in your feedback. Please leave it in the comment section at the bottom of the video below.